The woman in the black SUV leaned out of her window at 8:17 a.m. on a Wednesday and told the tomato seller she smelled like the gutter she was sitting next to. She said it loud enough for the children walking to Kwame Nkrumah Primary School No. 3 to hear. She said it in a voice that expected no reply. Then, she drove away. And the tomato seller did not move. She did not drop the bunch of tomatoes she had been arranging since 5:30 that morning. She simply watched the car turn the corner onto Osu Oxford Street, and then she went back to her work. But the woman in the black SUV did not know whose face was behind that gray headscarf. She did not know what had been named after that face inside the building she drove past every Thursday on the way to her salon. Her name was Adaize Okafor, and she was 51 years old, and she weighed 58 kilograms on a good week, a number that had dropped from 67 kilograms in the 3 years since her husband died, and left her with a stall, a kerosene stove, and 2 grandchildren who called her Mama because her daughter, their mother, had left for Italy in 2019 and stopped sending money by the end of that same year. Adaize sold tomatoes, onions, and garden eggs on the shoulder of the road that ran between the Osu Oxford Street roundabout and the entrance to the Accra Ridge Hospital every morning, except Sunday, when she went to church. And every afternoon she packed her goods into a wooden crate that a man named Solomon Mensah had built for her 14 years ago from timber scraps. The crate had her name burned into the side of it with a hot nail. She kept it in the alley behind the bread shop, because the bread shop owner, a man named Mr. Quarty, who had lost his wife the same year she lost her husband, let her store it there in exchange for 3 tomatoes on Monday mornings. The arrangement had been running without a written word between them for 4 years. She smelled, if you were close enough, of palm oil and something like dried chili, and the particular clean of someone who washes carefully in a bucket when the water runs cold. Her headscarf was gray cotton with a small yellow border. She had bought it in 2021 from the Makola market for 11 cedis, and she washed it by hand every 3 days and dried it on the windowsill of her room in the compound house on Asylum Down Road, where she paid 120 cedis per month for a room she shared with her 2 grandchildren, Kofi, who was 9, and Abina, who was 6. Her hands, when she arranged the tomatoes, moved the way hands move when they have arranged tomatoes every morning for 23 years, without looking, without hesitating, the thumb testing for softness, the fingers sorting by size without counting. In her left apron pocket she kept a small notebook with a green cover where she recorded every sale. The notebook was her third. She had filled the first 2 completely, every page, in pencil, and kept them in the tin box under her bed alongside the children's birth certificates and the photograph from her daughter's secondary school graduation. She had a skill that she had never told anyone about, because nobody had ever asked. She could calculate, in her head, the yield of any tomato pile by weight, cost, and spoilage rate, down to the pasewa, without paper, without pause, without error. She had learned this not from school. She had stopped at class 6 when her father's farm failed, but from 23 years of needing to know exactly how much she had, what she would lose, and what she could afford to lose. The vegetable buyers who came from the Accra Ridge Hospital canteen knew to trust her numbers without checking them. They had been coming to her stall for 7 years. The woman who ran the canteen, a heavy-set woman named Constance Amoa, had once said to a new kitchen helper that Adaize Okafor's count was more accurate than any scale she had ever owned. Constance had said this in 2022. By 2023, she had retired. But the kitchen helpers still came. The woman in the black SUV was named Paulette Asante Boadu. She was 44 years old, and she was the wife of Dr. Marcus Asante Boadu, a cardiothoracic surgeon at the Accra Ridge Hospital, who had been chief of the cardiac unit for 6 years. She drove a 2022 black Land Cruiser with tinted windows and a personalized plate that read Moboa 1. She went to the hair salon on Cantonments Road every Thursday, and she volunteered at 2 school fundraisers per year, and she considered herself, in her private thoughts, to be a person of substance. She did not know any of her domestic workers by last name. She knew their first names because she used them when she called out instructions from the upper level of her house. She did not stop to buy tomatoes. She bought her produce from a supermarket in East Legon, where the tomatoes were packed in cellophane and labeled with a price per kilogram that was 4 times what a daise charged. On that Wednesday morning at 8:17, she had been held at the roundabout for 9 minutes by the school traffic, and when she finally edged forward and saw the tomato seller squatting over her display arranging her goods with no apparent urgency, something in her released. She had been holding a frustration she could not name at her husband for a reason she could not explain, and the traffic had made it worse, and the woman in the gray headscarf with the tomatoes was there and available. And so she said what she said. She said the woman smelled like the gutter. She said it in a clean blouse and pearl earrings and drove away, and thought nothing more of it before she reached the salon 12 minutes later. Adize finished arranging her tomatoes. A schoolgirl slowed down and looked at her with the expression children make when they have witnessed something they do not have words for yet. Adize looked back at the girl and said, "Quietly, go to school, my daughter." The girl went. By 8:45, Adize had sold her first 4 piles, 3 to a woman in a nurse's uniform and 1 to a man carrying a breadbasket, and had written the transactions in her green notebook in pencil, neat columns, time, quantity, price, total. Her handwriting was small and exact. It was on the following Thursday that the thing happened that would take 3 weeks to fully unfold. Adize's grandson Kofi had been complaining for 4 days of a pain in his chest when he breathed in, a tightness that he described with the precision of a 9-year-old who had been taught to say what he meant, as like someone is pressing a thumb from inside. She had taken him on Tuesday to the community clinic on Amamoma Road, where a nurse practitioner named Linda had listened to his chest, written a referral letter, and told her that the boy needed an echocardiogram and that the community clinic did not have the machine. The referral was to the Accra Ridge Hospital. The echocardiogram, Linda had explained, would cost 380 cedis. Adize had 214 cedis in the tin box under her bed. She had spent the 2 days since the referral counting and recounting this figure, and the number did not change. She took Kofi to the Accra Ridge Hospital on Thursday morning at 7:30 before opening her stall in a trotro that cost them 450 cedis. The hospital entrance on the ground floor had marble flooring that caught the morning light. There was a reception desk staffed by 2 women in pale blue uniforms. The woman Adize approached was perhaps 30 years old, with a name tag that read Blessing. Blessing looked at Adize's gray headscarf and her apron. Adize had not changed the apron. She had come directly from the stall. And she looked at Kofi, and then she looked at the referral letter that Adize placed on the desk. She held the letter as though she was reading it, but her eyes moved across it without settling. "For the echocardiogram," Adize said, "they sent us from the community clinic." Blessing set the letter down. "You need to see the billing office first. Room 4, that way." She pointed without looking. In the billing office, a man named Gerald, his name tag had no surname, explained that the echocardiogram was 380 cedis, that a deposit of 200 cedis was required before the appointment could be scheduled, and that the appointment scheduling had a 7 to 10 day waiting period after the deposit was received. He said all of this in the tone of someone explaining bus routes. Adize asked whether there was a payment plan. Gerald said there was not. She asked whether the referral letter changed the process. Gerald said it did not. She said that her grandson was 9 years old and that he had been describing a pain in his chest for 4 days. Gerald said he understood. He said the policy was 200 cedis before scheduling. If this story is already sitting somewhere in your chest the way I think it is, stay with me. What happens in the next few minutes changes the direction of everything. Daisy took Kofi by the hand and walked back to the lobby. She sat him on a bench beside a potted plant, and she told him to wait, and she went to look for anyone she recognized. She did not recognize anyone. She went back to the reception desk and asked Blessing if there was a social worker or a patient assistance office. Blessing said there was a social welfare desk, but it was on the 2nd floor, and the person who staffed it was not in until 10 o'clock. It was 8:14 a.m. The lobby was filling. Adeze went back to Kofi. She straightened the collar of his school uniform. He was still wearing it. She had not sent him to school, and she told him they would wait. Kofi said his chest felt tight. She put her palm on his sternum and held it there without pressing. At 8:47 a.m., a group of people came through the lobby's main entrance. 2 men in suits, a woman with a clipboard, and a man in a hospital white coat with gray at his temples, and the kind of stillness in his walk that belonged to people who were never late. The woman with the clipboard was speaking to the suited men, but the man in the white coat was looking at the lobby with the expression of someone conducting an inventory. He paused when he reached the center of the room. His eyes moved across the bench area. He looked at Kofi, then at Adeze, then at the green notebook Adeze was holding open on her lap, where she had been calculating, for the 3rd time that morning, whether selling her next 2 days' stock in advance to Constance Amoa's replacement could produce 200 cedis before the weekend. He walked to the bench. He was carrying a file. He crouched to Kofi's level, which was not something a person did if they were in a hurry, and he said, "How long have you had this?" looking at Kofi's chest. Kofi said, 4 days. The man looked at Adeze. "You have a referral?" She gave him the letter. He read it. Actually read it, not the way Blessing had read it. He handed it back. He stood and said something to the woman with the clipboard in a low voice that Adeze could not hear. The woman wrote something. Then he looked at Adeze and said, "Room 17. 2nd floor. I'll have someone meet you." He walked on. The group moved with him. Adeze sat for 3 seconds, then picked up Kofi's hand, and they went to the elevator. Room 17 was part of the pediatric cardiology wing. The nurse who met them had been told to expect them. The echocardiogram was performed at 9:31 a.m. by a technician who let Kofi see the screen and who explained, in words a 9-year-old could receive, that the image was like a photograph of the inside of his chest, but taken with sound instead of light. Kofi said that was interesting. The technician agreed that it was. The reading was reviewed within the hour. The finding was a small atrial septal defect, a hole between the upper chambers of the heart, that was described as minor, manageable, and requiring monitoring every 6 months, but not surgery at this stage. The doctor who read the results sat with Adeze for 11 minutes and drew her a diagram of the heart on the back of a blank form and marked the location of the defect with a circle and told her what signs to watch for and what would prompt a different conversation. He gave her his office number written on the back of his card. He said the monitoring appointments would be billed at the community clinic rate through the referral pathway and that she should make the next appointment before she left. The billing woman at the cardiology desk had a different manner than Gerald. She had been told something before they arrived. She did not mention the 200 cedi deposit. Adeze came down to the lobby at 11:47 with Kofi beside her and a follow-up appointment card in the pocket of her apron. Kofi said he was hungry. She said they would get bread from Mr. Cordy on the way home. She was reaching the lobby's main doors when a nurse she did not know stopped next to her and said, in a slightly lowered voice, "Madam, do you know, have you seen the donor wall?" Adeze did not know what a donor wall was. The nurse pointed to the far right of the lobby, to a wall she had not looked at when she came in because she had been steering Kofi toward the reception desk. She walked toward it now. Kofi walked beside her. It was a large panel of dark wood with names set into it in brass letters. At the top it said, in recognition of those whose generosity built this wing, 2014, below were names organized by gift tier. At the top tier, in letters slightly larger than the rest, there were 4 names. One of them was Dr. Abina Okafor Mensah, cardiologist, 2008-2014, founding donor. Cardiac Pediatric Wing. Adeze stood in front of this wall for a long time without speaking. Kofi, who could read the name aloud. He looked up at his grandmother. "Mama," he said, "that's our name." Adeze touched the brass letters with the side of her finger. Not the whole hand, just the side of one finger. The way you would touch something you were not sure was real. Her sister Abina had died in 2014. She had died in March, the week after the Harmattan stopped and the air went damp again. She had been a pediatric cardiologist. She had trained in Kumasi and then in London, and then she had come back and worked for 11 years at the Accra Ridge Hospital, and Adeze had come with her husband twice to visit her in her apartment near the hospital, and she had been proud of her sister in the way you are proud of someone whose life went in a direction so different from your own that the pride contains a kind of amazement. When Abena died, a car accident, a lorry that ran the light on the Tema motorway, the hospital had held a service. Adeze had attended. She had sat in the back in her best dress, the one she wore to church. She had not known until this moment, standing in the lobby with her grandson, that Abina had given money, apparently a great deal of money, to help build the cardiac pediatric wing, and that her name had been put on the wall, in brass, where it had been for 12 years while Adeze sold tomatoes on the road outside and walked past the hospital entrance every morning, and had never gone in far enough to see it. The man in the white coat was crossing the lobby again. He saw her standing at the wall. He came to stand nearby, not close, the way people stand when they are acknowledging a moment they understand they are adjacent to. He said, "Did you know her?" Adeze said, "She was my sister." He was quiet. Then he said, "She trained me. I was her registrar in 2011 and 2012. He looked at the wall. She used to say that the children who came in with nobody behind them needed the most careful hands. He paused. That's why we built this wing. Kofi was reading the other names on the wall. He did not fully understand what was happening, but he understood that his grandmother's finger was still against the brass letters and that she had not moved it. At 12:32 that afternoon, a black Land Cruiser with the plate Moboa 1 pulled into the hospital's upper car park. Paulette Asante Boadu had come to collect her husband for a lunch she had arranged 3 weeks in advance at a restaurant on Cantonments Road. She came through the main entrance of the lobby and stopped to check her phone near the reception desk. She did not immediately look up. When she did, she saw a woman in a gray headscarf and an apron standing at the donor wall with a small boy. She processed the image without particular interest. Then, the woman in the gray headscarf turned, and Paulette Asante Boadu recognized the face. It was the tomato seller. The woman from the gutter. She was standing in front of the hospital's donor wall with her hand on one of the brass names, and the man standing next to her, Paulette now realized, was her husband. Her husband was standing beside the tomato seller and saying something, and the tomato seller was nodding. Paulette walked forward, slowly, in the manner of someone recalibrating at the same time as moving. Her husband turned when he heard her heels. He said, "Paulette, come and meet someone." He said it in an even voice, the way he said most things. "This is Adeze Okafor." Her sister was Abina Okafor Mensah. She trained me. Paulette Asante Boadu stood 3 meters from the tomato seller from Osu Oxford Street. Her pearl earrings caught the lobby light. She looked at the brass letters on the wall. Dr. Abena Okafor Mensah. She looked at Adeze's gray headscarf. At the apron. At the green notebook sticking out of the apron pocket. At the hands, which were the hands of someone who had worked with their hands every day for 23 years and which, at this moment, were still and folded in front of her. Adeze did not help her. She did not perform discomfort. She did not look away. She waited with the precise and unhurried patience of someone who had been waiting her whole life for the world to catch up to what she already knew. Paulette said, "I," and stopped. She looked at her husband. He was waiting too. She looked at the boy. The boy was looking at her with 9-year-old directness, which is the only kind of directness that cannot be socially managed. She said, finally, in a voice that had lost its salon on Cantonment's road register, "I was rude to you this week. On Wednesday. On the road." She said it without the performance of contrition, which was the most honest version of the sentence she could produce. Adeze looked at her. Then she said, "My grandson's name is Kofi. He has a condition with his heart that the doctors here are going to help us watch. He is going to be fine." That was the whole reply. Not because Adeze had rehearsed it. Because it was the thing that was true, and it was the only thing she needed to say. The woman in the pearl earrings had said one sentence on a Wednesday morning, and it had weighed nothing. The weight in this lobby was somewhere else entirely. Pressed into brass letters on a wooden wall, carried there by a woman who had died with a knowledge of what buildings are for. Paulette Asante Boadu did not eat lunch. She told her husband she would see him at home, and she drove back to East Legon, and she sat in the car park of the supermarket for 26 minutes before going inside. She did not buy tomatoes. She bought the same cellophane pack she always bought. But on Friday morning at 6:45, before the school traffic began, she drove to the stretch of road between the Osu Oxford Street roundabout and the Accra Ridge Hospital entrance, and she stopped her car and she bought 5 piles of tomatoes and 2 onions from a woman in a gray headscarf who was arranging her goods in the precise and careful way of someone who had been doing this every morning for 23 years. She paid without bargaining. She received the tomatoes in a black plastic bag. She drove to the salon. The arrangement did not become a friendship. It did not become anything that had a name. On Tuesday of the following week, at the request of Paulette, her husband, Dr. Marcus Asante Boadu, contacted the hospital's community health liaison and proposed a change to the billing protocol for pediatric cardiology referrals arriving with community clinic letters. A change that would mean children like Kofi would be seen without a deposit. Their costs entered into the hospital's charitable care account, which had been funded in part since 2014 by an endowment left in trust by a woman whose name was in brass on a wall in the lobby. The proposal was accepted by the board at their August meeting. The protocol change took effect on the 1st of September. By the end of that year, 37 children had been seen under it. Adeze did not know about the protocol change immediately. She found out in November when Constance Amoa's replacement, a younger woman named Ama, mentioned it while collecting her weekly order from the stall. Ama had a nephew with a heart murmur and had taken him to the hospital the previous month, and the nurse at the billing desk had told her about the new pathway. Adeze wrote the number 37 in her green notebook that evening. She wrote it in the column she used for things she wanted to remember, next to the date. She did not write anything else next to it. The number was enough. The woman the world saw was a tomato seller on the side of a road in Osu, 51 years old, 58 kilograms, in a gray headscarf and an apron with a green notebook in the pocket. The woman who actually existed was the sister of the woman who helped build the room where children's hearts were listened to for the first time. She had never spoken about this on the road. She had never been asked. There are people in the world who carry something precious and carry it in containers the world considers worthless. They are not hiding. They are not performing humility. They have simply learned that the worth of what they carry does not depend on whether anyone around them can see it. The container is not the point. It never was. The woman who decided what to say from the window of her car decided based on the gray headscarf and the apron and the position, squatting at the side of a road with a pile of tomatoes. She said what the container appeared to deserve. She did not know what was inside. She did not think to ask. You cannot know from the outside what a person has built, what they have lost, what they carry, or who taught the hands that are resting in their lap. This is not a lesson. It is simply a fact that people forget, because forgetting it is convenient. If someone you passed every day, someone invisible to you by habit, the woman at the roadside stall, the man who repairs shoes near your office, the grandmother in the seat across from you on the trotro. If one of them turned out to be the sister of the person who built the room that saved your child's life, would you have known? Would you have been able to know? And if not, what else are you not seeing? Leave your answer in the comments. I want to read it. Subscribe for more stories about hidden strength, quiet power, and the people the world overlooks until it runs out of other options. Until next time.